Unlocking cyber knowledge one episode at a time. This is Gnosis by Smart Comply Academy.
Welcome back to the third episode of the ISO 27001 series. Today, we'll be diving into the ISO 27001-2022 structure and framework. My name is Olusola Oyekola, and I remain your host for this ISO 27001 podcast series. Welcome back, Mr. Sheyi.
Thank you very much, Ola. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. We have learned a lot from the last episode, and we are ready to go into the next episode. And if you're ready for us, then we are good to go.
Yeah, I'm super ready.
Thank you very much. Okay, can you take us through the Annex SL? Right, this is actually a very important one because it is not frequently talked about when it comes to implementation of the ISO 27001. What exactly is the Annex SL, and why is it such a key part of the ISO 27001?
Okay, so Annex Excel majorly provides that structure, unified structure, when it comes to providing that conformity when it comes to implementing ISO 27001. So ISO created the Annex SL to uniform or to unify all of its standards so that all of the standards have the same structure, so to speak. And that Annex SL comprises of 10 clauses, okay? And those 10 clauses are divided into two. So you have what we call introductory and also what we have mandatory. So the mandatory is what your auditors would actually be looking out for, especially when it comes to implementing or getting certified for ISO 27001. They would be looking out for the mandatory document. So the mandatory document is what you provide when you purchase your ISO 27001 standards. Okay, so it provides you with those 10 clauses, and then it provides you with all the information you need to understand about those 10 clauses. And the thing about it is that it uses a shall statement, meaning that it is mandatory. You can't bypass it. It's something that you have to do. So when you're reading your ISO 27001 standards, as it applies to the Annex SL, so each of those clauses you see it has a shall statement, a verb statement that says the organization shall do this, organization shall do that. So it means that it's a requirement. So if an external auditor is coming to help you, maybe you want to do a surveillance audit, for example, to get certified for ISO 27001, you would have to ensure that those mandatory documents are made available, because those are what they will be using to identify or to be able to audit you against if you're eligible, if you conform to the ISO 27001 standard or not.
Thank you very much. That's pretty much interesting. But how exactly does this Annex SL, how does it help organizations ensure consistency across the different ISO management standards that we have?
Okay, so now, so like I said, there are two. It is divided into two parts. Okay, so the introduction. Let me just list the 10 clauses. So the first clause is where you have your scope. The second clause is where you have your normative reference, where it talks about all the different references in your standard. And then the third one is where we look at the terms and conditions, terms and references. The different terms that you're using in your document, like your stakeholders, your different terms that is used in the standard. Okay. Now the mandatory now starts from clause 4 to 10. Those are where the mandatory document is. So the first one we'll be looking at the understand the context of the organization, where it speaks to the scope of the organization. What are the internal, the external threats or issues of concern that the organization is facing? Okay, and the next thing is that you're going to start looking at leadership. How is in terms of looking at the roles and responsibilities you have within your organization. So that's where you'll be looking at the organogram, taking a deep dive into the organogram. How does it affect information security within your organization? Looking at things around least privilege. You have one person occupying one particular role. So it gives you that broad, just to understand the leadership position, the roles and responsibility within your organization. And then the next thing now speaks to planning, where you begin to look at how do you go about your risk management within your organization in terms of planning, understanding how your organization fits. And then the next thing is then support. Support now speaks to how do you implement, all of those implementation in terms of I'm trying to remember that word now. In terms of training your staffs and all of those things, learning awareness, training and awareness, it speaks on the support. Then we go into operations. So operations is where you begin to look at your risk mitigation plan. How do you go about risk mitigation, risk assessment? So you have all of those information under your operations course. And the next thing is where you have your operations, I'm sorry, your performance evaluation, where you begin to look at your evaluation in terms of how those controls, how are they doing, all of your structures and all. And then the last thing is continual improvement. Where are the areas where you think you need to improve and all of that? So when you want to implement ISO 27001, your focus should be on those mandatory documents, which starts from clause 4 to 10. Okay, that's where the structure comes into play, whereby you have to
Yes.
look through all of those different and the ISO standard document would help you to understand what each of those contexts is, what each of those clauses mean, because the document provides you with a lot of information that you need to understand the context, and then the ISO implementer will then sit with you and say, okay, let's take a look at the context of your organization. What are the internal issues you have? What are the external issues you have? So for the internal issues, you might be looking at some of your employees are not skilled. And then you start looking at, okay, how do you go about doing training? Some of the issues you might also be looking at is access control issues. You might begin to say, okay, we need to implement mandatory vacations or look at least privilege controls. So you have to look at it from both, even from external point of view. What are the external threats that your organization is, likely? What are the likely threats that your organization might be, susceptible to? So some of them might be
Yes.
theft, some of them might be ransomware attacks, social
Right.
engineering type of attack. So that is where the implementer will have to sit with different departments within the organization just to help them, across all of the different clauses. So
Okay.
when you're sitting with anybody or anybody that is actually in charge of the course, let's say lead context of the organization, for example, you have to sit down with the CEO or the C-suite executive or with the
Mm.
organization nominates to provide you with that type of information. So it's there you start digging deeper into the organization. What are the services the organization provide? Which countries do they operate in? What are the different issues that they might be facing in those? So you can understand the business more than the business owner itself. So
Yes.
those are the things that where the ISO consultants would have to do. Sit down with them, understand the context, take a look through all of those different clauses. And once they are done, they start looking at using ISO 27002, which is a guide to help implement the controls as well.
So you've taken us through the Annex SL, but you've not
Mhm.
been able to take us through how this particular Annex SL, how it helps ensure consistency across the different ISO management system standards. Can you walk us through it, please?
Okay, so the way an XSL speaks, like I mentioned, is that it provides a unified structure to all ISO standards.
All
So
ISO
they
standards.
have 10 clauses. So each of the standard has 10 clauses, right? Now, those
Yes.
clauses are also divided into two. We have what we call introductory clauses, and then we also have mandatory clauses. Now,
Okay.
your external auditor, depending on the type of, if you're doing a recertification, definitely use an external auditor. So the
Yes.
external auditor would help you, would be requiring you to provide information about the other mandatory document, right? The mandatory clauses.
Mm.
Now, let me just list those clauses. There are 10 clauses. So the first one is the scope. The
Yes.
second one is the normative references, where it lists all of the related ISO standards. And then we also have terms and definitions, which speaks to the key definitions in your ISO standards. And then now going back to where you have all of the mandatory documents or the mandatory ISMS requirements is where you have from clause 4 to clause 10. So the clause 4 speaks about the understanding the context of the organization. And what that simply means is, you help the organization understand where exactly are they from their scope. You want to understand the scope of the organization. You also want to understand what are the internal, external issues that they might actually also be having as well. And then the second thing you also want to look at is leadership. How is top leadership providing support to your ISMS requirement? Okay, so you're looking at things around the providing support, are they defining their roles and responsibilities, within the ISMS framework, the ISMS program you're trying to implement. So leadership, the leadership position provides you with, looking at things that also around policies as well. Are they, involved in the creation of the policies? And then the next thing is planning. The planning speaks to looking at it from a risk-based planning. How do you plan? Envisage security incident. What are you going to put in place? This is where you're going to be looking at your incident response policies that has to do with disaster recovery, policies that has to do with your ISMS policies. So you're just anticipating in case a risk-based occurrence happens within an organization. And then the next thing is support. So the support part speaks to where you're looking at training, ensuring that all of your users are adequately trained to understand both threats that is out there when it comes to information security, and then also looking at the documentation, your policies, are they aware of those policies? Where can they go reach out to read about those policies as well? And then the major part is the operations. This is where you begin to implement your risk mitigation plan. You implement a couple of your controls. You look at your risk assessment policy, your risk assessment. You do your gap analysis. How do you implement some of the controls? How do you identify what will be your risk treatment plan and all of that? So it's paid more of that. So that's where you do more of your Annex A controls, where you implement a lot of your control. And then the ninth is performance evaluation. This is where you look at your internal audit comes to play, where you need to look how do you monitor, provide report on your operations, report on your risk assessment, risk management, and all of that. And then the final one is the improvement. As the improvement, we will look at how do you improve on non-conformity, how do you get things done appropriately, how do you optimize your process. So these are the 10 clauses, and then from clause 4 to clause 10 is where you have the mandatory requirements. So that speaks to where you will play a major role in terms of implementing your ISMS. And when you want to implement ISMS, for example, you would definitely need to purchase an ISMS standard, a ISO 27001 standard. So you purchase the ISO 27001 and then the control guide, which is the ISO 27002, which allows you to be able to implement controls and all of that. So that's how the clauses, the Annex SL structure works.
Thank you very much for walking us through that. I think from what you have mentioned, I am able to also establish that this actually follows the 3 pillars of cybersecurity and compliance that people, process, and technology to address every area of time. That actually makes a lot of sense. And I think another thing that our listeners would like to know is how does this particular ISL, how does it improve the integration with other standards like ISO 9001, ISO 22301, and the other relevant standards that we have from the ISO series?
Okay, so the way it works is, so from an integration point of view, like I mentioned, all of those standards have the same Annex SL. All right, although the requirements will be definitely different, but it's always that same structure. Now, when it comes to integration, so see as instead of you having to implement 3 different policies or 3 different requirements, you integrate them into one single requirement that caters for those 3 policies. Okay, for those 3 different standards you're trying to implement. Let's take risk assessment, for example. You're trying to do, which speaks to your planning. You're supposed to create a risk assessment or risk mitigation plan, for example.
Yes.
Now, your risk mitigation plan will also be involved. You should also have a risk mitigation plan for your ISO 9001, which is for quality management. You should also have for business continuity as well. Okay. So now, if you want to implement them separately, you're supposed to have each of those different documents. Okay, you should have your risk mitigation plan for your quality management. You should also have the same thing for your ISO 22301 for business continuity and all that. So when you're integrating them, what it means is that you're just going to have one single document that speaks to those 3 different standards that you're trying to implement. Okay, so you're going to incorporate all of those different requirements into one single document. So meaning that one document will be able to speak to quality management, implementation, will also be able to speak to business continuity as well, and then also ISMS. So that's the beauty of what your Annex SL helps you to do. Because of that unified structure, using the same terms, you can create a policy document that speaks to that addresses all the different three different standards you're trying to implement at the same time. So instead of you having to create different documents that speaks to for
documents.
quality management, yeah, you have just one document and then it speaks to all of those three different standards that you're trying to implement as well.
Are we saying that the controls that we have within these other standards for the ISO 9001 and the ISO 22301, we already have them under the ISO 27001? We already have them addressed under this particular ISO 27001 standard as well?
Well, I can say yes and I can say no. But the thing is that in incorporating your document. So, for example, let's say you want to do something that has to do with trying to look for something a little bit as simple as possible. So let's use risk treatment plan, for example. So
Yes.
in your ISMS document, there's specific type of risk that you would have specific type of risk treatment plan for. There's some specific risks that you would accept. There's some specific risks that you would have to do transference, for example, or you might have to do avoidance, or you might have to do mitigate. So let's use mitigate, for example. The way you mitigate a ransomware attack, which you know that you definitely need to have a lot of multiple backups, both offline and all of that, you won't definitely be looking at that from a business continuity. From a business continuity as well, you can also leverage or using backup. So if your system goes down, you can also quickly leverage your backup as well. So that speaks to that. But from a quality management point of view, where you're looking at it from a quality product, you might not use that same control. However, you should reference the control you're using to mitigate against the specific risk you're trying to address. Okay, so the idea is that you should have a consolidated document that will be able to address or speaks to all of those concerns, that speaks to ISMS, that speaks
Yes.
to business continuity, and also speaks to quality management as well.
So that is looking at it from the point of view of having an integrated management system. But
Exactly.
what about a situation where I am more focused on the ISO 7001 and I have the business continuity and quality management system coming up after that? Does
Okay.
it mean that the documents that I have provided for ISO 27001 will also be applicable to ISO 9001 and also business continuity?
Of what you're trying to look at, when it comes to implementing the other standards. But
That is
the idea behind it is just to ensure that whatever you're putting together in your ISMS will also will be broad enough to address, other standards like the, business continuity and also quality management as well. So it's just that way of just ensuring that you cater for all of the different standards. So even though you haven't implemented it yet, you understand, because you need to understand the requirements of which of the standards you want to implement. Because if you don't understand the requirement and then you create a policy in your ISMS program, that policy, if it's going to cater for the requirement of quality management or requirement of business continuity, then you need to know the requirement. And then when you're creating your policies, it will be incorporated into it, so it can increase the scope of what you're trying to cover.
Thank you very much for that. So one of the key changes in the 2022 updates that was revised recently speaks to the controls in Annex A. And I think I would like us to talk about what are some of the most significant updates that has been made to the standard.
Okay, so the previous edition had 114 controls, also categories as well. I think 114 controls, then 14 categories. The new updated version has 93 controls and then 4 categories. So the 4 categories speaks to organizational, people, sorry, let me say it again, operational, people, organizational, and physical. Yes, so it breaks it down to 4. Let me say that the part again so that it will make it captured. So the structure of the latest version has 93 controls and then 4 categories. Those 93 controls are divided into 4 categories. The previous edition had 114 controls and was divided into 14 categories. Now the categories we have in the latest version is the people, the organizational, and then you have technical, and then you also have the physical. So those are the 4 different categories that you have. So the 93 controls spans across all of those 4 categories. Now, the additional controls they had, because they reduced a couple of them, so they added things around cloud security, threat intelligence, web filtering. Yeah, so most of those controls, so the advantage is that they look at the threat landscape and then look at how information has been accessed. They begin to bring in new different controls that you should have in place. Now, when it comes to looking at all of those controls, so if, for example, you don't deal with cloud, you don't have any cloud service provider that you function with or that you transact with in terms of your customer data is not being sent to the cloud, then you don't need to have a cloud security control in place. Okay, so if, for example, you're also not going to be using it that has to do with threat intelligence, your type of business doesn't require any form of threat intelligence, you're not integrated with any threat intelligence platform, you're not like a SOC, for example, you definitely won't want to be using or integrating things around threat intelligence. So, in as much as there are a lot of additional controls, it also ties back to your scope. What exactly are you doing, and what exactly would this control help you to mitigate? Because remember, you have to go through the planning phase first. Look at all of the planning in terms of identifying the risk, and then you go back into the operations part where you begin to look at. That's where the controls plays a major role. So the control would have to speak to the type of business that you're doing. If you're not doing anything that's to do with web application, you're not in any form of web business, you don't need the web filtering control in place, so to speak. So the additional controls you have in place would determine, it speaks to the kind of business you're offering, and then you look at the risk that applies to it, and then you implement that particular control as well. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you very much. Yes, it does. But I'm looking at it from another perspective. I'm thinking, all of these updates that we're getting, how does it affect already certified organization? Does it have an impact on their already certified audits, or do they need to make any extra updates, or does it mean that their current certification or their current controls that they have in place is out of date?
Well, I think ISO provide a mandate that I think 3 years after the control has been implemented, you need to upgrade. You need to have your ISO 27000 and 7 using the latest upgrade. So if you have the old version, if you're still within the time frame, yes. But after the time frame, you need to find a way to upgrade. So what you would have to be doing is you have to look at those additional controls and implement those controls as well that applies to the kind of business you're doing at the moment. So I think the only thing that to just apply to is that it will allow the organization to invest more in specific type of controls. So let's say prior before now they weren't involved in cloud, but now they're not doing cloud, based on what they're doing. So they would have to, look into the ISMS policy, the ISMS program from scratch, and then adopt the latest controls. But the clauses doesn't change actually. The clause still remains the same, but the controls you have to implement also needs to be there. So you might just want to implement the additional controls, take out some specific controls, implement some additional controls, and definitely you should be good to go.
Thank you very much for that clarity. Can we take a bit to talk about the controls that we have within the Annex A, which are the security controls? How does it relate to an organization's risk assessment process? How is it factored into this process?
Okay, so when it comes to implementing control, you first need to understand the risk that you have within your organization. Now, let's look at one of the controls that allows you to do vulnerability management, for example. But definitely, you will have looked at the threats within your organization, identify a couple of threats based on the threat landscape, also based on the kind of industry that you have. You then need to say, okay, how do we proactively manage these vulnerabilities or this type of threats that is plaguing our industry? Okay, so one thing you want to do is, okay, we need to then implement a vulnerability management solution. To be able to proactively identify these threats. One of these you might also be looking at, okay, I want to implement penetration testing, for example, or be more aggressive with my cybersecurity awareness training. Okay, so the reason why you're going to be implementing any control is because you identify a risk that particular control is meant to solve. So if that risk does not exist, there's no need for you to implement the control. You can't implement a control for something that the risk does not apply. And also, you also need to know that each of these controls is also capital intensive. So, for example, if you want to do vulnerability mime or you want to hire a pen tester to come do on a penetration test in your firm, you have to pay for that service, and that service is gonna come. That money is gonna come from somewhere. Okay,
Yes.
so in as much as you want to be 100% compliant, you also have to look at your budget. You have to look at your business. This particular risk, does it applies to us? If it doesn't, then there's no need to invest in that part of control. So every control definitely comes, especially when it comes, especially technical controls,
Mm.
specifically comes with a financial implication. So you definitely have to make some financial investment. So you have to weigh your pros and cons. If it really doesn't apply to you, then there's no need investing in that particular control.
Amazing. Thank you very much for that. And I think I would like us to take a look at what changes could happen in the future. So what I'm simply saying is, looking ahead, how do you see ISO 27001 evolving in the future? Are there any anticipated changes or trends that might arise in the nearest future?
Well, I don't know what the future holds, but just looking at the trend, I think that one of the things that might be incorporated is artificial intelligence, because now most organizations are investing in artificial intelligence, even though there's a standard that speaks artificial intelligence. But I'm guessing that a control might be implemented. You might have a clause or a technical control that manages how your artificial intelligence is being used within the organization. So one of the things I can just say at the top of my head is I know that artificial intelligence will definitely be involved in ISMS, anytime soon. And then another thing, one of the things I also know is that, they just don't come up with controls. They also look at how things are evolving. So as things evolve, based on security professionals, they then begin to look at, okay, based on this, advancement in this technology, we need to implement this type of control to be able to ensure that it helps the organization to be protected against attacks, that might be coming towards from that direction. So as the information security threat landscapes keeps evolving, then there will definitely be some additions that will be added to the control mix, that organization needs to implement, especially from an ISMS point of view. And there'll also be some controls that will also be removed. Okay, as things also begin to evolve. So the point is, when it comes to implementing controls or ISMS coming with additional controls or reviewing the controls, is they keep looking at the threat landscape. As things keeps evolving, they look at, okay, I think we should drop this. This is no longer considered as a threat. These are the kind of things that are now considered as a threat, and then begin to bring in controls in place, to help ensure that the ISMS of any organization is protected and also optimized as well.
Hmm. Thank you very much, Oluwaseyi. That was very insightful. And I'm very sure our audience now has a solid understanding of the ISO 27001 framework. But if you have any questions about the 2022 structure, please drop them in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode. Before we go, remember the wealth of knowledge waiting for you at Smart Comply Academy. Visit academy.smartcomply.com, explore our courses, and get certified. This is Gnosis by Smart Comply Academy, unlocking cyber knowledge one episode at a time. I am your host, Olusola. See you in the next episode. Bye for now.
Bye for now.